Hello. Um, yeah, I'm back with this again. I'm partway through my next video. I recorded the audio for it, I think like last weekend. So I'm going to start work editing the audio next weekend, which shouldn't take too long. And I've got 2 weeks off for Christmas. So I'm very hopeful that my next video will be out in January. So it's not too long, probably sort of early mid-January, really. Um, I'm very optimistic that I can get it done in those 2 weeks. Um, but I know what I'm like, so I don't want to. I don't want to. Set unrealistic expectations. So yeah, I thought I should do another tier video just in the meantime because it's been a little while, and we're coming up to Christmas. I would like to do a main Christmas related video at Christmas, but I suck at planning. Um, so yeah, instead we're doing a tier list of assorted Christmas moments from various soaps. Now, I've got all the main ones, a few stick out to me at least, anyway. So if you're not familiar with a tier list, we have all our moments, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna rank them. So S is the top, D is the bottom, and then the others are sort of in between. So yeah, we might as well just get started. So the first one is the death of Pauline Fowler in EastEnders in 2006. Now, I don't know how a lot of people feel about Pauline Fowler. I never really liked her much. Um, I think originally there's probably an interesting character there, but when I was watching EastEnders, I just regarded her as sort of a grumpy old woman. And I think there's a lot of conversation about how they handled her character. I think they sort of turned her into a bit of a stereotype by the end. She went from being someone with a bit of nuance and a bit of humanity and a bit of interest into something who was basically just there to aggravate Sonia and sort of complain and moan about things. And certainly her death was not reacted to particularly well at the time. Just the fact that she died of a brain hemorrhage after it is later revealed being attacked by a character who didn't really have that much impact in the long run, and died alone in the snow on Christmas Day. As I say, Pauline never really did anything for me as a character. I don't hear much conversation about her these days in terms of any sort of legacy. She's not the sort of character people look back on fondly like they might with Dot and Peggy and you know Frank Butcher and people like that. I think Pauline Fowler's sort of very quickly been forgotten. There's not really too much there with Pauline Fowler. Still, she was a legacy character. She was in it right from the get go. Certainly, the biggest star um, in the EastEnders right at the start. Uh, the actress who played her had been a very popular sitcom in this country, and she, stood out amongst a cast that was largely unknown. Um, and so, for that reason alone, I guess it's notable. But as I say, Pauline Fowler never really did anything for me. If she did, it tended not to be good. So, yeah, it was. Yeah, I suppose it's really only noteworthy for the fact that it's the end of a legacy character, but there's probably more that can be spoken about when it comes to Pauline Fowler, just in terms of who she was at the beginning and what she turned into. Um, but I don't think there's much there in terms of legacy, really, which is interesting to me. Especially when, as I say, you have a character who was played by such a big star, at least comparatively speaking, and was in it for so long, and really doesn't seem to be remembered to any, large degree. Not that long after her death. So, yeah, fairly low down on the list for Pauline. And the next one, this is the 2009 Christmas from Coronation Street. This is the scene where Sally tells Kevin she's got cancer. Um, Noteworthy in part because famously the actress who played her discovered that she had cancer after being prompted to get tested because of the storyline. That's how she found out, and it was very treatable. Um, Not the first time that's happened. I've heard that. Uh, I've heard a number of stories like that where an actor is playing someone or is in a storyline with a character who gets cancer and tests for it and finds out that they have cancer. I think it happened to Julie Goodyear actually. I think um, on the Coronation Street set in like the 90s, they had a cancer storyline. I think it might have affected Bet, and they had a van on site doing tests, and Judy Goodyear went and got tested, and it turns out she had something. Um, so it's noteworthy for that respect. This comes sort of uh, in the middle of Kevin's affair with Molly Dobbs, um, yeah, who's Tyrone's girlfriend, I think, at that point, maybe wife. Um, I never really cared for Kevin. I never liked Kevin as long as I watched. I never liked Kevin all that much. I never thought he was a particularly likable character at all. And certainly this is his lowest point. Um, I like the scenes later on. I like it when he does sniveling, that actor. There's a scene at Molly's funeral where he gets punched and falls into a grave. That was always very satisfying to me to go back and watch that. Um, but I never really liked him uh, as a character. I mean, back when Kevin and Sally was sort of introduced as a couple, they were the boring ones. And there's that famous story about the affair he had in the 90s. And the way that came about was that they got a new executive producer who asked who's the happiest couple on the street. Someone said, "Oh, it was Sally and Kevin," and he said, "We'll break them up." Um, it's what sums up the attitude of executive producers. That's just what you do. You introduce chaos and uncertainty into the lives of characters who aren't really doing much. Um, and this is one of those moments as well. Um, as I say, I never really cared for Kevin, but it is a great moment. Just that was a long-ish running storyline, um, and it was building up to this moment where Kevin's going to tell Sally, and suddenly the game is changed, and now he can't because that would be too monstrous even for him. Um, but it's not a Christmas moment I think about a great deal. It's not a particularly important Christmas moment aside from in the life of the actors who played it, when it's a hugely significant moment and probably the most important storyline she ever did, if only because it meant that I can't pronounce her. I think it's Sally Devener or something. Um, she found out she had cancer because of it. Coronation Street saved her life. So yeah, it's probably much the same as Pauline in that regard. Now I am cheating a bit for the next one. This didn't, strictly speaking, happen on Christmas Day. This is the Emmerdale Storm of 2003. Um, I talked about this a bit in the last tier video when it came to EastEnders. This is one of the moments I remember watching, and I still think about that. I still think about um, Trisha Dingle dying in that storm and Marlon finding her and just being destroyed he wrote her that list of reasons why he loved her, um, and she was reading it in the rain. That's one of the things about soap. You tend to watch it when you're younger, and every now and then there'll be something that just sticks with you, and that's something that really sticks with me. Yeah, the death of Trisha Dingle. It came 10 years after the plane crash, intentionally. So, um, obviously not as big or as important as the plane crash, which we will get to because it's on this list. Um, but from a personal perspective, it's one of those moments that just stays with me. I can't explain why, but it does. Um, so yeah, let's knock it up to B. because while it works for me on a purely personal level, I don't know whether there's too much else in there to really justify being knocked up any further. Um, so the next one is the death of Tiffany Mitchell. Now this is another New Year's one. This happened in '98. Now the reason why I want to talk about this is because I reckon there's a video in this, and not necessarily in anything to do with the character, more to do with the background stuff. Because some of you might know, Martine McCutcheon, she left EastEnders under an air of some controversy. She wanted to go into to sort of dip her toes in the water of a music career. Um, she wanted to move on to the next thing, and as it as the story goes, she asked to step away for a little bit of time, but that the door be kept open for her. And this was not well received by the powers that be at EastEnders, who read that, I think correctly, as Martine McCutcheon wanting to have that option, that EastEnders would be her backup option. That if she tried to break into music and it didn't work, she could always come back to EastEnders. And they did not particularly care for the idea that they were being treated as a safety net, and that they would wait for her. And if better things didn't work out, well, all right, she'd come back. So they killed her off because of that. And her music career, yeah, kind of did. I mean, the most significant thing is when she played, and I use the term advisedly, Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady, a stage production, which did not go well. Um, I don't know whether it was just sort of nerves and anxiety about performing live, which is a very different experience than doing them on television because there's no edit. Everybody, you're acting with your entire body in a way you aren't on television if you're on stage. And she missed a lot of performances. And her co-star, um, oh God, what's his name? I know his name. I know his name. He was a very serious career actor, and he was not best pleased that this soap star had turned her attentions to being a musical actress um, and sort of treated it so blasé really. And he famously came on stage and it's Jonathan Pryce, by the way. I looked it up. Yes, Jonathan Pryce was not happy with the fact that he was constantly acting alongside understudies because Martine McCutcheon wasn't there. And he came on stage one night and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know who I'm going to be acting alongside. It could be Martine McCutcheon, it could be the understudy. I don't know." He did not hide his disdain for the situation at all, and it culminated in her winning, I think, a Tony Award or a West End Award, something like that. So she won an award for Best Actress, and that ceremony was filmed and televised. And Jonathan Pryce is not clapping; he is pissed off because she has been rewarded for this. Um, that's an interesting behind the scenes story to me, and I think I'm probably going to do something on that at some point. Um, Definitely on the list. I definitely think it'll be interesting. The event itself, Tiffany's death. I mean, Tiffany was never really a character that stood out too much for me. Um, Frank Butcher was. I mean, he did it. Um, he was the one who hit her with his car. Um, and then, of course, that affected the way Grant, who was married to Tiffany, viewed him when Frank married Peggy. In that whole relationship. But really, this is a moment that sticks out more for me than because of the behind the scenes stuff than anything really in the actual episode. So I think the behind the scenes stuff put it here. Actually, you know what? I think that's probably more appropriate, just in terms of placement, because Trisha Dingle's death, that storm, I mean, that stays with me. And then this stuff, it's noteworthy in its own way, but doesn't really do anything for me. And then Tiffany Mitchell's death. The moment itself, not too much. The behind the scenes stuff, kind of fascinating. Yeah. Now, the next one we have is probably one of the bigger ones on the list. This is, of course, Archie Mitchell's death in 2009. Now, I watched really all of the Archie Mitchell stuff. Um, I remember when he was introduced. I remember the seeds of some sort of dark history with Ronnie. Um, the way he sort of worms his way into the Mitchell family and exerts a degree of coercive and abusive control over Peggy. I think what's really interesting, not intentional, really, but Larry Lamb, he played two characters that around this time that were really pretty famous in this country. Two big products. Um, the first was Archie Mitchell in EastEnders. The second is Mick in Gavin and Stacey. Now, Mick is Gavin's dad. And it occurred to me that, in a strange sort of coincidence, Mick is sort of what Archie wants to be seen as. Like the gregarious patriarch who goes out and earns a good living and keeps everybody comfy and, holds court and is at the head of the table. That's very much what Archie wants to be seen as. Um, well, I always thought that was interesting. But Archie himself, I don't think he's my favourite villain of all time. He's probably my favourite EastEnders villain of all time. He might be my second to Richard Hillman, but Archie Mitchell was. I mean, is there anything that guy didn't do? Like, he was a rapist. He was violently abusive to his daughter. He sexually assaulted his daughter. He resulted in a miscarriage. He was going to kill his granddaughter with a garrote. He was abusive and used money to get what he wanted. And he dies alone on Christmas Day. I mean, this was billed as a big mystery in EastEnders. I mean, in hindsight, I'm not the first to say it could only have been Stacey. I mean, she was, still is, I think, the darling of the EastEnders upper production team. But I mean, I think I talked about this last time. My theory was that it was Tracy the barmaid as a child, and the reason why I thought that is because I thought, Tracy would be presented as some sort of silent guardian of the Mitchell family, and she would have watched this band come into their lives and ruin everything and take the one thing they loved most in the world away from them, which is the Vic, and that she would avenge them. Which obviously wasn't going to be the case, but I think it would have been interesting. Um, in terms of his death, I mean, I remember watching it and I remember liking it, but I think they sort of there's a number of things they do that sort of ruin Archie as a character after that for me. One of the things is that they mentioned after the fact that he was dying, um, which I don't really like because sort of he was going to die anyway, and it sort of makes you think, well, he was doing what he was doing because he knew he didn't have much time left and he didn't much care anymore, um, which sort of lessens things for me. I prefer to think of him as some sort of deeply abusive person who just stopped caring about the facade after a point. Um, so yeah, Archie Mitchell, great villain. Um, I will be talking about him as part of a different video, I think. I don't know whether he justifies his own video, but he's definitely a part of a video I want to make about Richard Hillman. So if I ever manage to get around to that, that would be great. But as part of a death, or as part of a larger storyline, and the moment itself is well shot. I mean, there's so many. It's one of those classic mysteries where everybody has a motive, and it's the end of a great character. Yeah, it's up there for me. Um, And this is probably the most important entry on this list. I've spoken before about how um, the Richard Hillman storyline, I've called it the most important moment in soap. I don't think that's true. It's definitely one of them. I think this is the most important moment in soap, probably. I don't know. It's so difficult, and you probably noticed I am a bit of a one for hyperbole, but this is definitely up there. Um, because this is the first soap Christmas. This is what makes. Without this moment, none of these other things exist. It's sort of fascinating to me. I wrote the way I got into this site was, um, I think a couple of years ago. Did some writing for a blog that a friend of mine ran, and he suggested I do some Christmas posts. And the thing he suggested I do was uh, soap Christmases. Um, and one of the things I talked about was Den and Angie's divorce and that scene. At the time, I sort of argued that it was interesting because it's built on information. Like, Den has a mistress and he wants to divorce his wife. So it's a bottle episode, so it's just the two of them and the window cleaner. Um, so we go into the episode knowing that Den wants to divorce Angie. So he has the power, and we have the information, and Angie's in the dark. And then Angie lies and tells him she's only got 6 months to live. So the power dynamics shift, and suddenly Den's in the dark, and Angie's got control, and we know that she's lying, and she knows that she's lying, but Den doesn't. But it also sets up the idea that this has to come to an end within 6 months, because obviously she's not going to die of a disease. She's either got to figure out a way out of it, or something's going to happen, or it's going to come out, and he's going to find out. And then you've got the scene on the Orient Express where he overhears her revealing the truth to the bartender, and the power dynamic shift again because now Den's got all the information and is in control, and Angie's in the dark. It's all leading to this one scene. One thing I didn't talk about in that written post was the fact that Christmas in soap used to look very, very different. Um, I mean, it was for the most part Coronation Street. It was variety shows, and it was tiny little things where you'd have like carolers would be featured, and you'd be going around the street singing carols, or to the local hospice, to the mission hall. um, Tiny little things like that. It was not a time when soap put big storylines out. I'd always assumed it kind of was, not necessarily to the extent it is now, but I assumed that it just seemed like a natural time to have the combination of a storyline, um, or a birth, or a marriage, or something. You never really get that. Um, so it's a really interesting moment in terms of soap. And this is the moment when Soap Christmas was born, and part of that is from the fact that the television landscape was just changing. It used to be dominated by Morecambe and Wise and things like Only Fools and Horses. They did big Christmas episodes, but the situation changed, um, and the television landscape evolved into something more along the lines of what we have now in terms of Christmas. Um, so there's a lot to talk about there, and I definitely want to make a video about the Den and Angie divorce. So for the fact that it's not just a great moment that is brilliantly built up to, and was watched by more than half the country at the time, which, even though there was bugger all else to watch, is still an achievement. It also probably one of the most important moments in all of soap. So for that reason, it's obviously up at the top. Um, the next one is also a really big moment in soap history. It's the Emmerdale plane crash from '93. Um, I'm going to be making a video about this, like in the near future. Um, I hope. Um, so far, that looks like it's going to be the case. It may change. I don't know. We'll have to see. But there's a lot to talk about with it. Um, Emmerdale at the time was sort of dying. It was being cancelled regionally, I think, um, and it needed something to really bring it into the new age. Because EastEnders and Coronation Street were sort of dominating the discussion, and Emmerdale looked pretty quaint by comparison. And the plane crash changed everything. Like in the space of a few episodes, the tide completely turned for Emmerdale. I mean, they killed a whole bunch of characters. They set up a load of plot lines for the future, and they changed what it meant to do a soap disaster. It's not the first disaster in soap. There'd been a fair few others, but this was the most expensive, and it was almost movie-like special effects. Big, big scale stuff that showed that something like a soap opera could compete on some level with big, high-profile productions. Um, Very important for Emmerdale, crucially important for Emmerdale, but also bigger in terms of the rest of the soap world because now soap disasters look far more like the Emmerdale plane crash than they do, the lorry crashing into the Queen or the Rover's Return, in the 80s. So that's up there too. Another really important soap Christmas. This is Hilda Ogden leaving Coronation Street in 1987. This is the year after Dylan and Angie's divorce reveal. So it's one thing for one soap to do a big Christmas thing, but the thing that really cements that tradition is when another one copies it. Um, I think it's worth talking about just who Hilda Ogden was, because I don't think she's spoken about too much these days. But Hilda Ogden was probably the most popular character in Coronation Street history. Um, just staggeringly famous in the country at the time. There was a survey in the 80s that asked people, I think it was sort of a rundown of the most famous women in the country. And Hilda Ogden was fourth. And the people ahead of her were Princess Diana, the Queen, and the Queen Mother. Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister. Hilda Ogden was more famous than the Prime Minister. Um, there was a Hilda Ogden Appreciation Society, amongst whom counted as members were Laurence Olivier and John. I think I can never pronounce his name. John Bentelman, Benjamin, something like that. Who was the poet laureate? Like big establishment figures who just sort of fell in love with Hilda Ogden. Um, she was huge in a way we can't really maybe appreciate these days. And Stan, her husband, had died the previous year, and I think Jean Alexander, being a consummate professional and a woman who took her craft really seriously, realized that the magic had sort of gone when Stan was dead, because that was a double act. And without that, Hilda didn't really have much to do. And I think Jean Alexander, by her own admission, she said she realized that it was time for her to go. There wasn't really anything there left for her to do. Um, and the thing that makes her departure so interesting is because it's not really a it's not really a part of the legacy in the sense. It's more of a reaction to it. Like nobody wanted her to be like shoved in the back of a taxi or go out in a blaze of you know glory or die or anything like that. Um, they kind of wanted to celebrate her, and that's really what that is. It's a nice little celebration in the Rovers, and she gets to sing, uh, which is nice because she's famously terrible at singing, and everybody encourages her for the first time ever. Um, and it's not just the characters saying goodbye to Hilda; it's the crew saying and the cast saying goodbye to Jean Alexander, and it's the audience saying goodbye to both as well. Everybody was sad to see her go, and it was just a nice, lovely send off. Um, and again, I can talk about it's getting a video at some point, individually from the probably two different videos. But the TV landscape comes into it as well, just in terms of ITV's sort of lineup when it comes to Christmases and why it was in their best interest to have a soap Christmas as well. Um, but yeah, I think along with basically everybody, I can't think of anybody who doesn't like this scene. It's just a really nice send off to a really nice character and a really nice lady as well, a really nice actress. So yeah, that's another top tier one. The death of Jamie Mitchell. Now I think about this fairly frequently. Um, one of the things that one of the things that's interesting to me is death in soap. Um, I think I may have mentioned this in one of the main videos, but soaps sort of have to be masters of efficiency or effectiveness, right? Because people sort of dip in and out of soaps, and you have a very broad audience pool. See, there's no point being too complex with it. You have to go for max effectiveness. Um, so the actor who played Jamie wanted to leave. He didn't say he wanted to be killed off. He maybe suggested that he might pop back someday, but when it comes to writing something like that, you have to sort of you have to soaps work on the ripple effect, right? So something happens and you get a year's worth of stories out of that for a character. And that's it. You don't have to think about that character for a year. And then something else will happen and you just sort of roll with it on and on and on. Like that. Just ripple effects constantly. So you could write out Jamie, but if you did that, would the ripple effect, would those ripples be very big? Probably not. Whereas if you kill him and you have him run over by another character, those ripple effects are really big because all of a sudden you've got Sonia's grief and her anger at Martin. You've got Martin's guilt. You've got Phil's guilt and Phil's grief. All this stuff that'll carry you for a good chunk of time. That's a load of storylines basically in the bag, right? So it's a good example to me about the thought processes behind soap deaths. Um, and there's other reasons why it's very effective. Just the fact that Sonia and Jamie were such a lovely little sweet couple. Then it happens. I really like the way that scene is shot and edited because it happens at the same time Billy and Little Mo get married, and they've got a choir singing "Stand by Me" in the background, plays over the scene, and we cut from Jamie having some sort of attack of some sort to the wedding, and then when we cut back, there's a scene of the Mitchells in the waiting room, looking sort of stunned and grief stricken, and inside the room is an empty bed, and Sonia's looking at the stars, and that communicates everything. You know immediately what's happened, all while that song is playing, and I really love that scene. I really do. Um, but in terms of its sort of not necessarily its deeper meaning, but what we can sort of learn from that is that effectiveness is key, and also that ripple effect is key. Like it's just a conveyor belt. Soaps. You're just trying to get to the next bit, right? This will keep you going for a while. We can get some mileage out of this, and then with something else, we'll have to find something else. Um, it's such a classic example of that. And so I've been toying around making a video about soap deaths, just the various ways in which behind the scenes motivations for killing off characters, like the guy in I'm so bad with names. Ernie Bishop in Coronation Street. He was pushing for sort of collective action to get better wages for the cast and crew on Coronation Street in the 80s or the 70s, I think. This was obviously not looked upon kindly, so they killed him off. Um, Another one I want to talk about is Ronnie and Roxy. That may well be a video. I'm getting a little off topic. That may well be a video in and of itself at some point. It's just sort of baffling to me that that happened, um, because it's not the best way to sort of get mileage out of those characters. With Jamie, there's no guarantee that the actor playing Jamie would have come back. You have to write him out then, right? And you have to leave it open for him to come back. Jamie and Sonia were in a good place. We have to figure out how to get them out of that. You have to figure out how to get him away from Phil. Why would he leave the street? There's no reason for him to leave the street. If he gets hit by a car, we don't really have to do much. Um, Whereas with Ronnie and Roxy, I mean, I think we all did at the time, they are going to regret this. And they have. Because those were two very, very popular characters. And there was always going to be a time when they really could have dealt with having those two women sort of on the back burner and bringing him out. Uh, but with Jamie, at a certain point, characters serve more of a purpose dead than alive. And given the options, they made the right choice, and they absolutely, took it to the nth degree. They got absolutely all the mileage they could out of that. Um, it's just a really, really solid example. Yeah. So this one, it's not particularly well cropped, but this is the reveal of Rosie Webster and John Stapes' affair in 2007. Now, this is a fairly popular one. I was not watching Coronation Street at this point. I was watching EastEnders, uh, but I remember hearing about it, and it always sort of confused me. I don't really know what Rosie saw in John. Um, I think it was just a power thing. I think maybe there was just the practical aspect of like getting something out of it, money or good grades or something. Um, it's not a storyline I really care too much for. Um, I mean, as a villain, I think there's probably something in John Stape. Just this sort of those are the villains I find probably most interesting. Villains who sort of just things run away from them. They don't mean to mess things up as much as they do. They just make a terrible choice, and before they know it, everything's gone to hell. Um, I don't know whether that's my favorite sort of villain, or whether I just like it when they say screw it and just make them monsters, like with Archie, um, or whether I like the idea of just normal stupid people just making mistake after mistake after mistake. Um, John Stable, I guess, is one of those people. But it's a good reveal for what it is. John buys Rosie a present, accidentally gives it to Fizz, but uses the same wrapping paper because he's an idiot. Um, and then he lies about buying nutmeg, and Fizz famously says that nobody buys nutmeg, which I don't know whether that's true. I mean, I've never bought nutmeg, but I imagine somebody must be at some point. Um, so I know it's a popular one. That's really why it's on here, because it is a popular one. But it's not a storyline or a moment that really stands out to me. It's got Kevin Webster in it, who I've never liked. I've never liked the actor. I've never liked the character. Um, I don't like this idea that he's sort of Coronation Street's answer to Phil Mitchell. Phil Mitchell is a far more interesting character than Kevin Webster. I don't think he's particularly likable at all. So yeah, that's another bottom one for me. So now a rare happy moment for an EastEnders Christmas. Um, this is the 2003 wedding of Kat and Alfie. Now, Kat and Alfie were really big back at the time. I remember that really well. And it's such a I can see why, because they're such great characters, or were. Alfie was sort of this Jack the Lad type, and Kat was sort of this, this woman who'd been through so much and had so much baggage, and was sort of brassy, but had this sort of very vulnerable interior. Um, and they work really well together. They're probably one of my favourite soap couples. Like I find it very difficult to think of one without the other. Um, and they were hugely popular. And this wedding is really the culmination of all that. And I sort of wish it had ended there for them. Um, the difficult thing about soaps, especially when it comes to popular characters, is that if you have a really great storyline and it's a perfect sign off for them, it doesn't matter because the soap's still going to go and go and go, and really popular characters, and the actor's going to leave. Probably not. They may agree it's a perfect time for them to go, but are they? No. Certainly, the executive producers aren't going to want them to go, and the fans aren't going to want them to go. You have this awkward situation where you sort of hit the peak of their relationship, this wonderful fairy tale wedding, the end of a sort of tumultuous courtship in a lot of respects, but also kind of a perfect courtship for these two characters who just work so well together. But then they've got to come back the next week and the week after that and the week after that, and you have to just sort of keep going and finding things to make them interesting, um, which is really difficult. It's been 20 years almost since then, uh, and they've been in it for a while now, and this was probably the moment. I don't want to see more of them. I love seeing them, but that's really the peak. My point is, at a certain point, you can only go downhill. Um, so yeah, it's a lovely one, but yeah, I mean, it's sort of hard to top that, and it puts you in such an unenvious position. Um, because, as I say, the only way is downhill. Now, the next one, this one is 2001. This is Trevor and Little Mo and the famous instance where Trevor pushes Little Mo's face into the Christmas dinner. No, I definitely want to make a video about this, not this moment, this storyline, because I think what I was saying earlier about when I was talking about Jamie's death, about effectiveness in soap, this is another great example. If there's not really a type when it comes to domestic abuse, in terms of women, this doesn't just happen to very vulnerable and gentle and shy and reserved women like Little Mo. It could happen to someone like um, I don't know, Cat. Cat. It could happen to Cat. But is that more effective than if it happens to someone who is very vulnerable and who makes us feel protective as an audience? I don't think it is. You couldn't really choose a better victim than Little Mo. And I think Trevor is such a great baddie in part because he feels so outside of everything. Little things. He's introduced later than the other Slaters. He's Scottish, which again puts distance between them. There's a difference there. He's got a place outside of Walford. All these things that sort of make him other. He's not quite part of it. He's kind of this outside force that comes in and has this really vulnerable woman in his grips. Um, that's sort of the best way to make something effective, and soaps do that all the time. This is a very effectively produced and executed storyline, and it clearly shows because of the results it had. Like, how many women did this storyline help? Just in terms of inspiring them either to see what was happening to them as abuse or to take action against it. Um, Countless, I've heard. I mean, those actors still get people coming up to them. I bet. I know that I can't remember her name, but she was a domestic abuse sort of charity um, organizer or creator. She said that storyline did more to help raise awareness of domestic abuse than anything she'd done in her entire career. Um, that's the power of soaps when they do stuff like this. It's a huge audience. They do it so effectively. It's basic, but it's effective. It's really effective, and it gets results. Um, it's definitely something I want to make a video on. That entire storyline, really. Um, another example of how that sort of basic but effective is when at that Halloween party, I think it's a Halloween party, where Little Mo finally kills Trevor. Do you know what she's dressed as? She's dressed as Little Red Riding Hood. Like, you can't get much more blatant than that. Um, just such a. There's so many storylines that have that sort of um, style to them. That it's effective, it's efficient, and it's effective. You choose the characters that these things happen to because it's more effective than other ones. Which is such a stupid way of phrasing that. But um, another example that is something I want to talk about is the AIDS storyline with oh, it's not Martin, it's the other one, isn't it? I'm so bad at names. I should remember my names. Yeah, the AIDS storyline in EastEnders. Um, one of the things that really stands out to me about that, and I want to make a video about it, Mark Fowler. Um, when Mark Fowler has AIDS, uh, he's not sort of the obvious choice for a character to have an AIDS storyline. The obvious choice for a character to have an AIDS storyline is Nasty Nick, because Nasty Nick's a heroin addict, and it would be so easy to write a storyline in which he uses a used needle and he gets AIDS, and that's him sort of he has to come to terms with his life and sort of make amends, and it's sort of a punishment for that character. That would be in line with so much of the literature and so much of the talking points of the time. um, but they choose to do it to Mark Fowler, and that makes for a very different storyline because everybody likes Mark is a good, decent, normal guy, right? um, he'd been on Grange Hill, which automatically makes him kind of a household name for people of a certain age. And then you bring in Peggy Mitchell. Well, Peggy Mitchell was already very likable, and she's played by Barbara Windsor, who has been in the Carry On films and was herself very likable. And she's sort of cast as the villain. So you've got this very likable character we all know and love, who's this isn't very Christmassy, who's got AIDS, and then you've got this other character who we all know and love, who is being really, really bigoted towards him about it. That's a really effective way to tell that story, especially given that there was a lot of fear at the time over AIDS, but now we see it happening to somebody we know and like, and that may well have gone a long way towards changing views of things like that. So I want to make a video about that. But Little Mo's abuse storyline, that is definitely getting a video, because that it's a very important storyline, and it's one that we're still talking about, and those actors are still getting people coming up to them. And Little Mo's getting her face pushed in the Christmas dinner. It's the sort of thing that sort of sounds ridiculous, or would even be laughable in the wrong hands. But with those two actors, especially him, it's really harrowing and it's really uncomfortable. Um, and that's a testament to them, and it's a testament to the writers, and it's a testament to the storyline. So that's an A as far as I'm concerned. And the last one is Manx and Stacey's affair. Now, this is the thing I made my first video on, and I think I said at the time that this is probably my favourite moment in all of soap, and it probably is. I remember watching this on that Christmas day in 2007 and just being so hooked to the screen because I'd followed that storyline and I hated Max, and I was so ready for this to come out. And I talked about it in the video, that setup where we know that the DVD is going to be played. It's there. We know it's gonna happen sort of after dinner because they mention that. But it's not just the Slaters and the Brannings we follow. We jump around to the Mitchells and the Beals as well. But when we're with the Mitchells and the Beals, the Brannings and the Slaters don't just stop still; they're carrying on throughout their day. So there's this feeling, which is obviously not the case, but it's a feeling nonetheless that we're being dragged away from the main action and might actually miss the moment itself. And I remember sitting there thinking, "Oh God, they're going to run out of time. We're not going to see it. This will be for the next episode. How can they possibly fit that in?" Um, but they do, and they play with it masterfully. It's Hitchcock's bomb underneath the table. We know this thing is going to go off. We know when it's going to go off because it's going to be at the end of the episode because that's the best time to do it. Um, but we might miss it somehow. Somehow we might miss it. It's just perfect. It's just absolutely perfect. I love it so much. Um, does it have a wider effect on soap? No, it doesn't. Does it change anything about what EastEnders was? No, not really. Um, it's just a really, really great moment. It's just such a great moment. I think a lot of people my age who watched EastEnders think exactly the same thing. It's just brilliant. I find it very difficult to think of anything that could top that for me. Um, so while all the game changes are at the top, you've got the creation of the soap Christmas, the thing that saved Emmerdale and changed what it meant to be a disaster in soap, and a farewell to probably the most popular character, maybe in all of soap, honestly. They're your top three. I'm gonna put my favorite ever scene in all of soap up there too, because just brilliant, just absolutely pitch perfect. Um, when I watched it again for that video, it was just as brilliant as I remember it being. Just very effective, really, really well done. I can't say enough good things about it. So yeah, so that's really the rundown of this. I don't know whether this is coming longer or shorter than the last one. Probably shorter. Um, but yeah, I mean, I could have done so many more soap Christmases. This is just an assorted grab bag of I think some of the more popular ones, certainly some of the more important ones. Uh, just looking through, yeah, I mean, I stand by my rankings. I mean, these three never really did much for me. Some things to talk about, important in some ways, but not really. Um, these things have some things to talk about, but fundamentally, in terms of the soap itself and in terms of the moment, there's not too much of import. I mean, the behind the scenes stuff with Martine McCutcheon is fascinating, and this is just a good feel good moment with two of the most popular characters EastEnders had at that point, probably the most popular characters they had at that point. Really difficult not to get invested in that relationship. Uh, these things more important or more personal. I mean, there's not really much going on with Trisha's death, to be honest, is there? It's just that's a really personal one. That just sort of sticks with me. Um, Jamie's death, just textbook, well executed death scene, really well designed scene surrounding. Um, just textbook example of how soaps do death. Uh, eight here, you've got the death of probably my favourite EastEnders villain, certainly one of the most iconic, and then a pivotal, not really a pivotal, but an infamous moment in a very, very important and well executed storyline. And then you got your top bunch, which, first, most important soap Christmas, thing that saved Emmerdale, Hilda Ogden, most popular character in Coronation Street, her departure, and then my personal favourite ever soap moment. Um, so, yeah, I hope that was all right. My plan is to put this on Patreon for a week, and then after that, it'll go on YouTube. I'll schedule it. Um, so yeah, I mean, just like the last one, if there's anything you think I should make a video on, by all means, let me know. Um, I'm more than happy to have suggestions and to think about them. I mean, there's areas of soap I don't know as well as others, and it's entirely possible that there's things I'm missing. And I'm more than happy to to hear suggestions. So by all means, um, I don't think there's too much to add to that. So I'll say goodbye and have a very merry Christmas. Bye.